Okay, so in this video what I'll do is go through the settings that I use whilst using the Apple TV. So the Apple TV has the option where you can actually keep it in constant Dolby Vision. So that's the usual setting that I actually have. So coming down to this one, so 4K Dolby Vision with 60 Hertz. 60 Hertz obviously switches out, and I do have match content enabled, so both dynamic range as well as frame rate. So what I'll do is, just while that's on, I'll pull up the TV settings, and on the picture settings we'll just go through. So what I usually have this set to, and these are the options on Dolby Vision. So you have Vivid, I never use this one, Standard, Cinema Home, Cinema User, and then Game, same thing again. I don't use the game mode on the Apple TV, not in Dolby Vision anyway. So this is the one that I actually use it on. So what we'll do is OLED light, this is 100%. This is obviously for bright room. Cinema, if you notice just there, will obviously darken it down a bit. This one I usually leave it on just because of the fact that for movies and that kind of content, I just want everything to pop as much as possible. And I've not really noticed, obviously with movies, it's not really that long a period that you're watching it for, so I've not noticed any eye fatigue or overly bright saturated pictures or anything like that. So I've found this to be fine. Brightness, contrast is 100. Brightness, same thing, not really adjusted this since how it comes. Sharpness, I've turned this up a little just to get a little bit more definition. Not everything that we watch is 4K. A lot of the online streaming services, at the moment in particular, because of the lockdown and COVID-19, a lot of the streaming services have actually reduced the quality at which they stream. So because of that, I've just got this cranked up a little. Normally we'd probably have it on about 10 to 15, but 20 isn't going massively overboard. Color on this one, I've got it turned up just by 2. Doesn't obviously, I mean, you can see from that picture in the background that it's not overly saturated or anything. Not going for crazy colors here. Dynamic contrast is off, super resolution off. Once again, warm 1 is the preferred settings. This is the calibrated kind of setting, and that's what I switch it to. So not a massive difference, but it's not going as cool as that one either. Next one, color management. All of these are left as they are, and peak brightness is set to high. That's just for your specular highlights during movies and stuff like that. Picture options, once again, all the processing is switched off and your real cinema is turned on. Motion eye care on this particular one doesn't really make any difference, but obviously if it's just more to do with a power consumption kind of thing, then I'd rather just leave that off. True motion, once again, is turned off for this. AI brightness is off. Adjusting brightness, the dynamic brightness and contrast and all of that kind of stuff, I really don't like that whilst watching movies. I find it really distracting. So, and that's all the settings on that one. On additional settings, same thing again, eye comfort mode disabled. These are obviously all enabled as per the previous setting. Right, so what I'll do now is I'll just switch it from Dolby Vision and let's go to a 60 Hertz HDR. With your little HDR logo just in the top corner. Like I said, I do really like those logos. Okay, so coming into settings, and on this one you do also have the Technicolor Expert mode. Now usually what we will do is I'll have it set between one of these two. So I'll either use Home or I'll use Technicolor Expert. This isn't anything that's really set in stone. I do adjust these on the fly depending on if I find for a particular movie that it's not quite what I wanted. So coming on to the Cinema Home for HDR, same thing again, OLED contrast 100, brightness 50, sharpness 20. Color on this particular one is 60, just because the content's slightly different. So Dolby Vision tends to be a bit more muted, a bit more balanced and kind of picture. Excuse me. Color temperature on this one, this I believe I did actually adjust. Just having watched a few movies, I've got it set to 25. It's like I say, it's not set in stone or anything. I can actually switch between these during movies. Dynamic tone mapping, I've not actually noticed this during a movie, but looking on this image, obviously it does make a bit of a, let's go back to that. It does make a little bit of a difference. Dynamic colors off. All of these kind of things I've left as they are. Color gamut is extended, wide extended, and super resolution I've got as low. If anything, I would normally probably turn this off. And your picture options, so on these I've actually got these set to low, just because sometimes the content might not be quite as good as the Dolby Vision content, so a little bit of all of these, but like I said, this isn't something that I'm using on every single one of them. Just pull that brightness down a bit. Motion IK is off. Okay, and what we'll do now is we'll have a look at the Technicolor Expert. So on this one, same thing again, AI picture is available, but I have that disabled. OLED light is 100, contrast is 100, brightness is 50, sharpness 15, color 50, and I believe all the rest of these would have been left as they normally are. So tone mapping is on, dynamic contrast is off, super resolution off. On this particular one, I don't think I have, so I've changed this from warm to, which is what it would normally be. Let me just switch this up. To warm 1. All the rest of these settings would have been left as they were. And picture options, same as all the other ones, so all of these are disabled. Black level is set to low, just to get a bit more contrast from it. Real cinema is on, motion IK is off, and true motion is off. AI brightness on this particular one is set to off. That is the HDR Technicolor Expert. Okay, and finally, I'll just go through the 4K SDR settings. So first thing, let's have a look at which options we get. So on this particular one, the only ones that I really use is game for when I'm using the IPTV, and then I use expert bright room and expert dark room. So that's the difference, obviously, just dims it down a bit. On this particular one, if I'm using this, it's probably usually for TV shows, so I will probably leave this on bright room. So let's go through the settings. So OLED light, once again, 100, contrast 100, brightness is 50, sharpness is 16. I believe that's cranked up just a touch. Color I've left alone on this one, 50. On the content that this will be used for, it probably won't be very vivid colors anyway. So by turning this up, you're just gonna just blow everything out, make it overly saturated. So that I leave alone on 50. Expert controls. Dynamic contrast is off. Super resolution, as I said, on this particular one, because it's generally going to be SDR content and lower quality, any help that I can give, I've left that, put that to high. Color gamut is wide, gamma is 2.2. White balance, once again, turn this to 1. That's the only change that I make in this setting. And peak brightness is set to high. Picture options, noise reduction is off. MPEG, a lot of these, the reason I've got these switched off is I don't mind a little bit of movie grain. So a lot of the times if you turn these on, say for example if you're watching something like The Walking Dead, the movie grain is there, it's meant to be there, it's there for a reason, and turning these up can sometimes get rid of all of the movie grain from those particular scenes, and it can just make skin smoothing overly processed, and it just gives a really bad effect. So all of these I generally tend to leave off. Real cinema, I leave that on. Motion IK is off once again, and true motion is off, because generally this can be used for TV shows. What I'll do is I'll just quickly switch to expert darkroom as well. I don't use this that often, but if we'll have a look. So as you can see that the OLED light is turned down considerably. Contrast is same again, turned down a little. Brightness is 50, sharpness is 10, color is 50. Expert controls, dynamic contrast is off, super resolution is off. Color gamut, I've left this to auto, and white balance on this particular one is once again turned down to 1 as opposed to 2, which is what it standardly comes on. Picture options, so once again everything turned off. Black level is set to low, as you can see, makes quite a big difference on that. Real cinema is on, and both of these are turned off. This particular mode I don't actually use very much. I've left it as it is, just so then I've got something to revert back to, but generally I tend to always go with bright room. And that's more to do with the content that I'm watching, as opposed to anything to do with the actual brightness of the screen or anything. It's each mode, once it switches through, so when you get some Dolby Vision content, it'll automatically switch to that. If you get HDR10, it'll switch to that. So it means that I can literally just leave these. Now the only place where it does fall down, and you might have noticed it at the start of some of these videos, was sometimes it will default to game. The reason for that, I believe, is because both of these are going through the soundbar, and obviously I have it enabled for instant game response. The reason, obviously, I want the instant game response on there is for when I'm using the IPTV. So generally, what'll happen is if my son's been using it and I come to it, sometimes, not always, if I'm watching anything with SDR content, it will revert back to game. And obviously it's quite noticeable when you're switching between the two. So what I'll do is I just come back in and switch these back out again. But the game mode, I personally actually left it on that for quite a while as well. So obviously these are the game settings for when I'm using the Apple TV. I don't do any gaming on this. This is purely for the IPTV, just to give it that slightly faster response time and make it a bit easier on the eye, especially when you're watching anything over IPTV. Generally tends to have a tiny bit of lag unless you're getting a proper 60 frames per second. Most of the UK channels stream at 50 frames per second, 50 Hertz as opposed to 60. So that's why I tend to go with the NBC SN, because that's an actual 60, so it just makes the content look a bit smoother once it's actually been processed and everything by the TV. But anyway, that was a look at the various settings for the different modes. Some of these you can only really use the settings once you've switched it out, once you've got that content playing, so it probably didn't actually give me all the options. It sometimes can do. But obviously that's a general overview of what I've got it set up as. I've made a few tweaks, just depending on how I like it, how I use it, the room brightness, what content I'm watching, all those kind of things. So if you enjoyed, obviously give it a thumbs up. Hopefully if you like this content, then you'll subscribe, and if you just share the video as well, just to help the channel grow. Thank you very much for watching.